Hi everyone, this is a short background to nonviolence and nonviolent communication ahead of our training. It was really good to bring a bit of context and some of the background and history so that when we meet we can really focus on practice. My disclaimer is that I'm not a historian in nonviolence. This is me piecing together what I know and what I'm interested in to give some kind of social context to what we're going to be looking at. And also a bit of a disclaimer that I'm using a template here in an illustration app. So I'm not quite sure how these images will interact with the content. Let's see how it goes, shall we? Okay, so first of all, let's think about, just spend a moment, what is nonviolence for you? What associations do you have with the word? What do you think of? How does the word make you feel? Just spend a moment reflecting on that. And then, how does the word nonviolent communication land in you? Is there a bit of a, what's that all about? Or is there a bit of a, spaciousness in you? I just want to acknowledge that NVC is one manifestation of nonviolence. There are others and many. Again, what is your initial response to the coming together of the word nonviolence and communication? If there's confusion, that's great. That's what we're going to be exploring. So we do need to explore what is violence. If we're trying to be non-violent or explore non-violence, we need an understanding of what is violence, what is non-violence, and what does non-violence mean in a violent world. These are all questions that we will be exploring, and just want to put them in now so that you're reflecting on them as we go forward. So, to practice nonviolence, we need to raise awareness of the violence that we experience around us, between us and within us. We can't go straight to a practice of nonviolence in a kind of spiritual bypassing way. We need to really see the violence that's happening around us. And in the box on the left, you can see that there can be violence in thought, word, and action. And there are all these different forms of violence, and there is a lot of research and scholarly inquiry into this. Direct violence, structural violence, cultural violence, and inner violence. So, for example, if we're talking about youth violence in inner cities, knife violence between young people, that's a form of direct violence. But we can only begin to address those if we are also looking at structural violence and cultural violence as well, and inner violence. We have to address all of these, not just pinpoint one form of direct violence, because we'll be missing out on so many causes and roots of violence. And NVC looks at the violence within communication. So if violent means acting in ways that result in hurt or harm, that's a very easy definition of violent. Then how much of how we communicate, judging others, bullying, having racial or other bias, blaming, finger pointing, discriminating, speaking without listening, criticizing others or ourselves, name calling, reacting when angry, using political rhetoric, being defensive, or judging who's good, bad, or what's right, wrong with people. Could you see that these could be forms of violent communication? Let's take a little look at all of those things and see if you can consider these as violence or if they have a reaction in you. And violence can emerge when we feel backed into a corner. A lack of choice correlates to a sense of danger, and options become limited as our body's survival mechanisms kick in. This can be a cause of violence. And this is, I'm taking this from Manachi's work. She's got a beautiful website called Trauma Informed MVC and has written a book called Decolonizing MVC. So we can become defensive, loud, stoic, passive, or non-communicative when we feel backed into a corner, when we feel like we don't have options, and these can all be forms of violence. And these are really important concepts that support us to understand violence. So separation, powerlessness, and scarcity. And when we notice we're in a space of separation or powerlessness or scarcity, we can ask ourselves, what violent structures are we on the receiving end of? So it helps us move beyond receiving or being in these states of separation, powerlessness, and scarcity, and see them as systemic and start asking questions about violence that is happening. And really thanks to Mickey Castran and all the work Mickey has done for drawing attention to these key concepts. So we are caught in a system of violence. So you may not want to harm any living thing, but you live in a country that buys, sells, and uses weapons not only on its own citizens, but on citizens of other countries. With this narrative, another form of violence, that it's the only way to maintain order and bring about peace. How do we live with this? How do we wake up in the morning with this? So the power of non-violence. British colonial rule ended in India after a non-violent movement. Non-violence doesn't mean passive inaction or powerlessness. Powerlessness is part of the violent narrative, as we've just explored. And Gandhi found ways to restrict the range of options of the British colonialists through moral force. And I draw you to Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan's book, Why Civil Resistance Works, where they have explored and researched non-violent movements for change. And also check out Michael Nagler, who is an eminent scholar in non-violence, particularly Gandhian non-violence. So just as violence can happen in thought, word, and action, you can practice non-violence in thought, word, and action. And non-violence is maintaining the humanity and dignity of those whose actions I disagree with or campaign against. And this includes a commitment to avoiding strategies of shame and humiliation, with the understanding that these will backfire and create more resistance and ongoing cycles of conflict. So non-violence also involves having enough people around who share responsibility for the whole. You can't actually do non-violence on your own in a little bubble. It's naturally a collective phenomena, and we need people around us to share responsibility for the whole. And it is very much about responsibility for the whole, as we'll come back on to, about interdependence. So back to nonviolent communication. Marshall Rosenberg developed nonviolent communication in the 70s and 80s, and he chose the phrase nonviolent, deliberately aligning with the nonviolent movements for social change in India in the 30s and 40s and the civil rights movements in the 50s and 60s, to deliberately align with those movements. He also drew very much on Carl Rogers' emergent work around empathy. So here are 5 points of nonviolence, which I like to hold these 5 points. So the first one is non-harming. And non-harming is a phrase, a translation in a way. Nonviolence is also a translation of the word ahimsa, which Gandhi used, and stating it's more than just the absence of violence, it is intense love. And then Marshall Rosenberg also named that nonviolence is our natural state of compassion when violence has subsided from the heart. And I like that because there's an understanding there that we can have violence within us, and we go through processes so that that violence subsides, and we need support. We need those around us who are also sharing responsibility for the whole, not just us. So all of these things, these elements need to be in place for violence to subside from our heart. And then non-violence is the natural state of compassion within us after we have practiced. And it is a practice. Another element of nonviolence is to seek to understand the perspective of the other. And we do, within nonviolent communication, we do many practices to train us to do this. And I love this quote from Raul Martinez: if you had lived someone else's life, you would be doing exactly what they are doing. And when I'm criticizing someone or judging someone, this supports me to stop and start trying to understand their perspective. Courageous truth-telling is really important. It's not just about listening to other people's truths, it's about sharing our truths. So I love this quote from Jane Manfredi: to speak the truth even if our voices shake. Our own truth is worth the telling. It is ours, no more, no less. We don't have to chop everything down with our sword of truth. Sometimes we can point with it. And I like that last little bit. Our truth might not change the world. Sometimes it can point us, people, in a direction that is worth going in. And our truth is ours, no more, no less. Interdependence, really, really key concept, and which is summed up in this amazing quote from Martin Luther King: I can never be who I ought to be until you are who you ought to be. And I remember Marshall Rosenberg saying something like, while there is hunger in the world, my need for food is never met. And that works for all of the needs that we're going to be looking at. While I may fulfill my individual need, but while that need is lacking at some place in the world, that need is not being met because we are interdependent. And then finally, this is a really important element: self-connection or inner peace. What do we do when our needs aren't being met? What do we do when things are hopeless? And from Václav Havel, sometimes we need a willingness to be in hopeless places and be a witness. So this points to the need for grief and the need for mourning. And within nonviolent communication, mourning is a need, meaning that we need it. And without mourning, our well-being suffers. When someone dies, we need to mourn. When there is injustice, we need to mourn. When there is tragedy, we need to mourn. When I'm not getting on with a project that I want to be getting on with and I don't understand why, I can mourn. And it gives us a space to integrate and rest and move forward. So mourning is a really key piece within nonviolent communication. And mourning is just one part of finding inner peace. It's our own internal practice. So I want to just name the 2 hands of nonviolence, which was coined by Barbara Deming, activist in the States. And this is a really beautiful and easy to remember metaphor for nonviolence, where we have 2 hands, one saying no and one saying yes. So with one hand, we say to one who is angry, or to an oppressor, or to an unjust system, stop what you are doing. I refuse to honor the role you are choosing to play. I refuse to obey you. I refuse to cooperate with your demands. I refuse to build the walls and the bombs. I refuse to pay for the guns. With this hand, I will even interfere with the wrong you are doing. I want to disrupt the easy pattern of your life. That is the no. And with the outstretched hand, we are saying, I won't let go of you. I'll cast you out of the human race. I have faith that you can make a better choice than you are making now, and I'll be here when you are ready. Like it or not, we are part of one another. Which is what Gandhi said in a different way. The essence of nonviolent technique is that it seeks to liquidate antagonisms, but not the antagonists. It's like we say no to the action or behavior, but say yes to the person. And a few other just quotes around nonviolence, what it is. It's the personal practice of not causing harm to oneself and others under every condition. And nonviolence doesn't mean just not doing violence. It's also a way of taking positive action to resist oppression or bring about change. So there is a constructive part to nonviolence, taking positive action to bring about change and having a vision of the world that we do want. Now, there are many critiques of nonviolence, which we will come across and hear, and I won't go into those now. Just name that they exist, that nonviolence isn't effective, that nonviolence props up the state, it requires us to empathise with the oppressor, all of these things. And this is part of the richness of it in the field of trying to create change. So finally, nonviolence should rehumanise what has been dehumanised. I hope this has given you some food for thought, which we'll go on to discussing in the sessions.